The message arrived on a humid Thursday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office overlooking downtown Phoenix. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister, Vivian. Final headcount confirmed. Thanks for understanding about the wedding. Small ceremony only. Love you. I stared at the screen, reading those words 3 times before the reality hit me like ice water. I wasn't invited to my own sister's wedding. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I called her immediately, my hands trembling as I dialed. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice artificially bright like she was talking to a client instead of her sister. Hey, Natalie, I'm actually in the middle of dress fittings. Vivian, what do you mean, thanks for understanding? Understanding what exactly? A pause stretched between us, filled with the distant chatter of what I assumed was the bridal shop. When she finally spoke, her tone had shifted to something rehearsed, almost businesslike. Look, Nat, you know how stressful wedding planning is. We decided to keep it really intimate, just immediate family and our closest friends. You've been so busy with your law firm anyway, and with David's family flying in from Seattle, we just don't have the space. The words landed like physical blows. Immediate family. I was her sister, her only sister. We'd grown up sharing a bedroom in her cramped apartment in Tucson, whispering secrets after Mom turned off the lights. I helped her with algebra homework when she was failing freshman year. I drove 4 hours to surprise her at college graduation when our parents couldn't afford the trip. Vivian, I'm your sister. How am I not immediate family? You know what I mean, she said, and I could hear her moving, probably stepping away from wherever she was. It's just different now. You have your career, your fancy life in Phoenix. This day is about David and me, about the people who've been part of our journey together. The dismissal stung worse than any courtroom defeat I'd ever faced. My fancy life. As if success was something to be ashamed of, something that disqualified me from family moments. What journey, Vivian? I've been here for every relationship you've had since high school. I was the one who picked you up when Jeremy broke your heart sophomore year. I helped you move into 3 different apartments. I co-signed your car loan when your credit was shot. That's not the same thing, she snapped, and suddenly I could hear the real Vivian beneath the diplomatic wedding planning voice. You were always the one with everything figured out. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect life. This is my moment, Nat. Mine and David's. I don't want to spend my wedding day feeling like the family screw-up next to my successful lawyer's sister. The honesty was more brutal than any lie could have ever been. After 28 years of being sisters, she saw me not as family but as competition, not as someone who loved her, but as someone who made her feel small. So this is it? You're just cutting me out? I'm protecting my day, she said firmly. David agrees. His family doesn't know about the differences in our situations, and I want to keep it that way. I want to be just the bride, not the bride whose sister shows up in designer clothes and makes everyone wonder why she's marrying a guy who manages a sporting goods store. The casual cruelty of reducing her fiancé to his job title while simultaneously attacking me for mine revealed everything I needed to know about how deep this resentment ran. David is a good man, I said.
I know he is. But you wouldn't understand. You've never had to worry about being enough for someone. Everything just comes easy to you. If she only knew how many nights I'd worked until 3 a.m., how many weekends I'd spent alone in the office, how many relationships had withered because I was too busy building the life I thought would finally make me worthy of love and respect. If she knew how desperately I'd wanted someone to be proud of me the way our parents never quite managed to be. The wedding is in 3 weeks, she continued, at the Desert Botanical Garden, small ceremony, small reception. I know you'll understand. Understand. There was that word again, used like a magic incantation that would make her betrayal acceptable. I don't understand, Vivian. I don't understand how you can stand there in a wedding dress and tell me I'm not family enough to watch you get married. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice now, but they didn't soften the blow. If anything, they made it worse. She was crying about having to exclude me, as if this decision had been forced on her by circumstances beyond her control, instead of being a choice she'd made. "I'm not making anything hard. I'm just trying to understand how we got here." "We got here because life isn't fair," she said. "Some people get everything, and some people have to fight for scraps of attention. This is my day to not be the sister who got left behind." The call ended with a soft click, leaving me staring at my phone screen as it faded to black. Outside my office, the law firm hummed with its usual energy, phones ringing, printers whirring, associates rushing between meetings with arms full of files, normal Thursday sounds in a world that no longer felt normal at all. I set the phone down on my mahogany desk next to the framed photo of Vivian and me from last Christmas. We were laughing at something our cousin had said, her arm around my shoulders, looking like the close sisters I'd thought we were. The woman in that photo would never have believed that 3 months later she'd be banned from the other woman's wedding. But looking at it now, I could see what I'd missed then. The way Vivian's smile seemed slightly forced. The way she leaned away from me, even as her arm draped across my shoulders. The way her eyes didn't quite meet the camera, as if she was already somewhere else, already planning her escape from my shadow. I turned the photo face down and tried to return to my quarterly reports, but the numbers blurred together meaninglessly. Somewhere across town, my sister was picking out flowers and tasting cakes for a celebration I wasn't invited to attend. Somewhere, she was building the most important day of her life around the deliberate exclusion of the person who'd loved her longest. And somewhere, though I didn't know it yet, the events that would change everything were already being set in motion. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The weekend after Vivian's devastating phone call, I found myself driving the familiar route to our childhood home in Tucson. Mom had texted asking if I could help her organize the garage, but I suspected she'd heard about the wedding situation and wanted to play mediator. The 3-hour drive through desert landscape gave me too much time to think, too much space for memories to surface. Our mother, Elena Rodriguez, had always been the family peacekeeper, smoothing over conflicts with homemade tamales and diplomatic silence. She never took sides, which meant she never really protected anyone either. When I pulled into the driveway of the modest stucco house where we'd grown up, I could see her through the kitchen window, probably preparing enough food to feed an army, despite expecting only me. "Mija," she said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and dish soap. "You look tired. Are you eating enough?" The questions felt automatic, maternal muscle memory that had nothing to do with really seeing me. I was 31 years old, had been living independently for over a decade, but she still worried about whether I was eating vegetables and getting enough sleep. "I'm fine, Mom. Just work stress." She nodded knowingly, though I doubted she understood what corporate law actually entailed. To her, my job was something vague and important that happened in tall buildings and required nice clothes. The specifics didn't matter as much as the fact that it paid well and impressed the neighbors. We spent the afternoon sorting through boxes of Christmas decorations and old photo albums. It was while flipping through pictures from our teenage years that the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every family gathering, every milestone, every moment captured on film told the same story. Vivian at the center, glowing and beloved, while I hovered at the edges like supporting cast. There was Vivian's quinceañera, her pink dress spread around her like flower petals while extended family members took turns dancing with her. I stood in the background wearing an ill-fitting, borrowed dress, holding a cup of punch and trying to look like I belonged at the party that was supposedly celebrating both of us turning 15. Except it wasn't celebrating both of us. I'd turned 15 3 months earlier, marked only by a cake from the grocery store and dinner at Denny's because money was tight.
But when Vivian's birthday arrived, suddenly there was money for a DJ, for catering, for hundreds of dollars worth of decorations.
She always loved being the center of attention, Mom said fondly, pointing at a photo of 8-year-old Vivian posing dramatically by our Christmas tree. Such a little performer. In the same photo, I sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically arranging gift-wrap scraps into neat piles. Even as a child, I was the one cleaning up, while she was the one being admired. I'd convinced myself that made me mature, responsible, worthy of different kinds of praise. But looking at these photos now, I could see the truth. I was already learning to make myself small so she could shine brighter. The high school graduation photos were particularly telling. Vivian had graduated a year after me, and somehow her ceremony had felt more important, more celebrated. My graduation had been on a Tuesday afternoon, rushed because I was graduating early and the school had to squeeze me into their schedule. Vivian's was on a Saturday with perfect weather, followed by a backyard party with all our relatives. In the photos, she glowed with pride, while everyone fawned over her accomplishment. My early graduation, which should have been seen as exceptional, had been treated as an inconvenient scheduling conflict. "You are always so serious," Mom continued, flipping to a page of prom photos. "Vivian knew how to have fun." There it was again, the subtle implication that being focused and driven was somehow a character flaw. Vivian's C-average and pretty-heavy social life were signs of a healthy, balanced teenager. My straight A's in college preparation were evidence that I was too serious, too intense, missing out on what really mattered. I studied the prom photos more carefully. Vivian looked radiant in a red dress that had cost 3 months of Mom's overtime shifts. She was surrounded by friends, laughing at some joke I wasn't part of. In the corner of the photo, barely visible, was the edge of my own prom dress, a blue clearance gown I'd found at TJ Maxx and paid for myself with money from my part-time job at the library. No one had taken individual photos of me that night. No one had fussed over my hair or makeup. I'd gone to prom with Jason Miller, a sweet boy from my AP Calculus class, and we'd had a perfectly nice time discussing college plans and scholarship opportunities. But there were no photos of us, no proud parental moments captured for posterity. The camera had been focused entirely on Vivian and her date, tracking their every move like they were celebrities. "Remember how worried we were when you decided to go away for college?" Mom said, turning to pictures from my high school graduation party, a small gathering that felt more like an obligation than a celebration. So far from home, so expensive. We didn't understand why you couldn't just go to community college like normal kids. Normal kids. The phrase hit like a slap. Vivian was normal, staying close to home, taking her time with school, not pushing too hard or dreaming too big. I was abnormal, ambitious, hungry for something bigger than what our small corner of Tucson could offer. The photos from my college years were sparse, mainly because I hadn't come home often. I'd worked multiple jobs to pay for school, spent summers in internships instead of lounging by our neighbor's pool with Vivian and her friends. In the few pictures that existed, I looked thin and stressed, dressed in thrift store clothes and squinting against the sun during rushed holiday visits. Meanwhile, Vivian's college photos showed a different story. Even though she was attending the local community college part-time and working at a clothing store, her life looked full and social. Group shots at parties, beach trips to California with friends, romantic dinners with whatever boyfriend she was dating that semester. She looked happy, carefree, unburdened by the weight of trying to build a future. "You missed so many family gatherings," Mom said, pointing to a photo from Cousin Ricardo's wedding. Vivian was in the foreground, dancing with the groom, her smile brilliant and uninhibited. I wasn't in the photo at all because I was in Chicago that weekend interviewing for law school. "I was interviewing at Northwestern," I reminded her.
I know, mija, but family is important too. Ricardo still asks about you. He felt bad that you missed his wedding. The guilt was expertly applied, as always. Not acknowledgement that I had been pursuing opportunities that would benefit our entire family in the long run, but gentle reproach for prioritizing my future over a single social obligation. This was the tightrope I'd been walking my entire life. Every achievement was also a betrayal. Every step forward was also a step away from them. The pattern became clearer as we moved through the albums. High school honor society induction? No photos, because it conflicted with Vivian's volleyball game. Dean's List recognition? Briefly mentioned over dinner before conversation shifted to Vivian's new job at the mall. Law school acceptance? Celebrated with takeout Chinese food while Vivian got a surprise party for making varsity cheerleader. It wasn't malicious, exactly. My family wasn't cruel or deliberately neglectful. They simply operated from the assumption that my accomplishments were expected, unremarkable, while Vivian's were cause for genuine celebration. I was the daughter who would be fine no matter what, who didn't need encouragement or special attention because success seemed to come naturally to me. Vivian was the daughter who needed protection, support, and constant affirmation to build her confidence. The irony was crushing. My achievements had been hard-won through countless hours of study, sacrifice, and determination. Nothing came naturally to me except the drive to work harder than everyone else, but because I didn't complain, didn't demand attention, didn't make my struggles visible, everyone assumed I was effortlessly successful.
She always felt like she was in your shadow, Mom said quietly as we reached the most recent photos. Even when you weren't around, people would ask about you. How's Natalie doing in law school? Is Natalie going to be a judge someday? Sometimes I think Vivian felt invisible next to your accomplishments. There it was, finally spoken aloud. The resentment that had been building for decades, the feeling that my success somehow diminished her worth. But what Mom didn't say, what nobody acknowledged, was that I'd felt invisible my entire childhood. Every award I'd earned, every goal I'd achieved, had been met with polite approval before attention shifted back to Vivian's more pressing needs. I never meant to overshadow anyone, I said, closing the album. I just wanted to make something of myself. I know, sweetheart, but you have to understand how hard it's been for her, watching you accomplish so much while she struggled to find her place. The conversation felt familiar. Another variation on the theme that had dominated our family dynamics for years. My feelings, my struggles, my sacrifices were always secondary to Vivian's emotional needs. Even now, as I sat in our childhood kitchen, processing the pain of being excluded from her wedding ceremony, the focus was on her discomfort, her insecurity, her need for protection from my success. I helped Mom carry the photo albums back to her bedroom, noting how the most recent pictures showed Vivian and David looking happy together at various family gatherings. They'd been dating for 2 years, but I'd only met him a handful of times at group events. He seemed nice enough, quiet, steady, completely devoted to Vivian. In the photos, he looked at her the way I'd always hoped someone would look at me, like she was the most fascinating person in the room. He's good for her, Mom said, following my gaze. Very stable, very supportive. He doesn't make her feel bad about not having a fancy career. Another subtle dig delivered with maternal concern. The implication that my career somehow made other people feel inadequate, that success was a weapon I wielded thoughtlessly against those who hadn't achieved as much. It was a perspective that turned every accomplishment into an act of aggression, every promotion into evidence of my selfishness. As I drove back to Phoenix that evening, the desert sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I replayed the afternoon's revelations. The photos had confirmed what I'd suspected but never wanted to admit. I'd been the spare, in a family that only had room for one star.
My role had been to succeed quietly, to make them proud without making anyone else uncomfortable, to achieve enough to reflect well on the family, but not so much that it exposed anyone else's limitations. Vivian's wedding band wasn't really about space limitations or keeping things small. It was about finally having a day where she didn't have to share the spotlight with the sister who had supposedly been hogging it their entire lives. It was about creating a narrative where she was the beloved daughter, the one worth celebrating, while I remained conveniently absent from the story. The realization should have made me angry, but instead it made me profoundly sad. We'd both been prisoners of a dynamic that pitted us against each other instead of supporting us both. She'd spent her life feeling inadequate next to my achievements, while I'd spent mine feeling emotionally starved for the kind of unconditional celebration she received effortlessly. By the time I reached my house in Phoenix that evening, I understood that this wasn't really about a wedding invitation. It was about 31 years of accumulated resentment, decades of feeling like there wasn't enough love to go around, a lifetime of believing that one sister's success required the other's diminishment. What I didn't understand yet was how dramatically the situation was about to change, how the very success that had driven us apart would soon become the bridge that brought us back together in ways none of us could have imagined. The memories started flooding back with startling clarity during the sleepless nights following my conversation with Mom. I'd lie in my king-size bed in my pristine Phoenix townhouse, staring at the ceiling and remembering moments I'd buried under years of achievement and forward momentum. The deeper I dug into my childhood, the more I understood how we'd arrived at this point. I was 7 when Vivian was born, old enough to remember the seismic shift that occurred when she entered our family. Before her arrival, I was the center of our small universe. Dad would come home from his job at the auto parts store and listen to me read from my picture books. Mom would let me help in the kitchen, standing on a step stool to stir soup while she praised my careful technique. I was their little scholar, their serious child who asked thoughtful questions and colored inside the lines. But the night Vivian came home from the hospital, wrapped in a pink blanket that seemed to glow under our kitchen light, everything changed. Suddenly, my parents moved around her like planets orbiting the sun. Her cries interrupted my bedtime stories. Her feeding schedule determined when we ate dinner. Her nap times dictated whether we could go to the park or the grocery store. "You're such a good big sister," everyone kept telling me. "Natalie's going to take such good care of you," they'd coo to the baby, as if my primary purpose had shifted overnight from being their daughter to being her caretaker.
I tried to adapt, the way children do. I learned to whisper when she was sleeping, to wait patiently when she needed to be changed or fed, to entertain myself quietly while Mom tended to her endless needs. I told myself I was being mature, helpful, the responsible older sister everyone praised me for being. But even at 7, I could sense the subtle shift in how love was distributed in our household. The birthday parties were the clearest early indicator of where I stood in the family hierarchy. My 8th birthday fell on a Tuesday, a school day, which Mom explained made it difficult to plan anything elaborate. We had cake after dinner, a sheet cake from the grocery store with generic happy birthday lettering. My present was a set of chapter books, practical and educational, wrapped in newspaper because we'd run out of gift wrap from Christmas. Vivian's first birthday, by contrast, was a Saturday afternoon extravaganza. Mom spent weeks planning, crafting handmade decorations, and preparing a buffet that could have fed 50 people. Extended family drove in from across Arizona, neighbors brought gifts. Someone hired a photographer who captured every moment of Vivian's delighted expression as she smashed her custom-made cake. "It's different because it's her first birthday," Mom explained when I asked why my parties were never like that. "First birthdays are special. Besides, you're older now. You understand that birthdays don't have to be big productions." I nodded.
already learning the lesson that would follow me into adulthood. My needs were less important than Vivian's because I was capable of understanding and accommodating, while she required protection and indulgence. School became my refuge, the one place where being smart and focused was universally appreciated. I threw myself into academics with the fervor of someone who had discovered their talent. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, Mom would tape it to the refrigerator with pride. When I won the school spelling bee, she called Grandma Rosette a brag. For brief moments, I felt like I had found my way back into the spotlight. But those moments never lasted long. Vivian would toddle into the room, babbling something adorable, and attention would shift to her like metal filings drawn to a magnet. She didn't have to earn praise. She generated it simply by existing, by being beautiful and charming and effortlessly captivating. By the time I was 10 and Vivian was 3, the dynamic had crystallized into something that felt permanent. I was the dependable daughter, the one who could be trusted with responsibilities, who didn't need constant supervision or encouragement. Vivian was the treasure, the delicate flower who required careful tending and abundant affection. The incident that cemented this understanding happened during my 4th grade science fair. I'd spent weeks constructing a volcano that actually erupted, staying up late to perfect the chemical reaction, painting and labeling every component with scientific precision. The night before the fair, I practiced my presentation until I could recite it flawlessly. "I'm so proud of you, Mija," Mom said, helping me load the project into Dad's truck. "You worked so hard on this." But that morning, Vivian woke up with a mild fever. Nothing serious, just the kind of childhood illness that passes in a day or two. Mom immediately shifted into crisis mode, taking her temperature every hour, calling the pediatrician, hovering anxiously over her as she dozed on the couch. "I don't think I can make it to your science fair," she told me apologetically. "Vivian needs me here, but Dad will take you, and you can tell me all about it when you get home." I won 2nd place. The judges complimented my thorough research and clear presentation. My teacher, Mrs. Henderson, made a point of telling Dad how impressed she was with my work ethic and scientific thinking. I should have felt triumphant, validated, proud of my accomplishment. Instead, I felt hollow. When we got home, Mom was reading stories to a fully recovered Vivian, who was giggling and climbing all over her like a playful kitten. She didn't have to earn praise. She generated it simply by existing, by being beautiful and charming and effortlessly captivating. By the time I was 10 and Vivian was 3, the dynamic had crystallized into something that felt permanent. I was the dependable daughter, the one who could be trusted with responsibilities, who didn't need constant supervision or encouragement. Vivian was the treasure, the delicate flower who required careful tending and abundant affection. The incident that cemented this understanding happened during my 4th grade science fair. I'd spent weeks constructing a volcano that actually erupted, staying up late to perfect the chemical reaction, painting and labeling every component with scientific precision. The night before the fair, I practiced my presentation until I could recite it flawlessly. "I'm so proud of you, Mija," Mom said, helping me load the project into Dad's truck. "You worked so hard on this." But that morning, Vivian woke up with a mild fever. Nothing serious, just the kind of childhood illness that passes in a day or two. Mom immediately shifted into crisis mode, taking her temperature every hour, calling the pediatrician, hovering anxiously over her as she dozed on the couch. "I don't think I can make it to your science fair," she told me apologetically. "Vivian needs me here, but Dad will take you, and you can tell me all about it when you get home." I won 2nd place. The judges complimented my thorough research and clear presentation. My teacher, Mrs. Henderson, made a point of telling Dad how impressed she was with my work ethic and scientific thinking. I should have felt triumphant, validated, proud of my accomplishment. Instead, I felt hollow.
When we got home, Mom was reading stories to a fully recovered Vivian, who was giggling and climbing all over her like a playful kitten. She didn't have to earn praise. She generated it simply by existing, by being beautiful and charming and effortlessly captivating. By the time I was 10 and Vivian was 3, the dynamic had crystallized into something that felt permanent. I was the dependable daughter, the one who could be trusted with responsibilities, who didn't need constant supervision or encouragement. Vivian was the treasure, the delicate flower who required careful tending and abundant affection. Middle school brought new challenges and deeper understanding of our family's unspoken rules. Vivian started kindergarten that year, and suddenly our mornings revolved around her elaborate preparation rituals. Mom would spend 20 minutes styling her hair into perfect curls, letting her choose between multiple outfit options, packing special snacks in her lunchbox. Meanwhile, I'd gotten myself ready since 3rd grade. Shower, dress, grab whatever was available for lunch, catch the bus. My independence was praised as maturity, but I began to understand that it was also a form of benign neglect. Because I could take care of myself, nobody felt obligated to take care of me. The contrast became especially stark during parent-teacher conferences. When my teachers raved about my academic performance, my parents would nod politely and ask practical questions about homework expectations and graduation requirements. When Vivian's kindergarten teacher mentioned that she was such a bright, creative child, Mom would light up like Christmas morning, asking for specific examples and hanging on every word about her daughter's social development and artistic expression. "She's gifted," Mom would tell relatives after these conferences, her voice warm with pride. About me, she'd say, "Natalie's always been a good student, very responsible."
Good student. Responsible. These became the adjectives that defined me, clinical and colorless compared to the vibrant words used to describe Vivian. Creative, charming, spirited, special. High school brought the realization that I could use achievement as a form of communication, a way to earn the attention that seemed to flow naturally toward my sister. I joined Honor Society, debate team, and academic decathlon. I volunteered at the library and tutored struggling students. I built a resume that would impress any college admissions officer. But even my most significant accomplishments were filtered through the lens of how they affected Vivian. When I was inducted into the National Honor Society, the ceremony conflicted with Vivian's middle school dance recital. Without discussion, it was assumed that I would attend the induction alone while the family went to watch Vivian perform 3 minutes of choreography she'd learned in gym class. "You understand," Mom said, not really asking. "She's been practicing so hard, and she's nervous about performing in front of people. She needs us there." I understood perfectly. I understood that my achievements were expected and therefore unremarkable, while Vivian's required emotional support and family celebration. I understood that being capable meant being expendable, that strength was measured by how much neglect you could endure without complaint. The college years crystallized these dynamics even further. I earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University, which should have been a massive financial relief for our family. Instead of celebration, there was concern about me leaving home, worry about me changing, subtle pressure to stay local like a normal kid. When Vivian started high school, every milestone became a family production. Her first homecoming dance required weeks of preparation, dress shopping, shoe hunting, professional photos, a dinner party with her friends' families. Her report cards were scrutinized for signs of struggle, so additional support could be provided. Her social dramas were discussed at length around the dinner table, with everyone offering advice and emotional support. I called home once a week from college and listened to detailed updates about Vivian's life, while mine was summarized in perfunctory questions about grades and weather. The message was clear. Her life was inherently interesting, worthy of attention and discussion, while mine was a predictable series of academic achievements that didn't require much family involvement. Looking back now, I could see how we'd all participated in creating this dynamic. My parents weren't villains. They were working-class people trying to love 2 very different daughters with limited emotional resources. They'd learned to focus their energy on the child who seemed to need more support, while trusting the other to thrive independently.
Vivian wasn't malicious either. She'd simply grown up in a system where her emotional needs took precedence, where her struggles were met with immediate attention and her successes were celebrated as extraordinary achievements. She'd learned to expect that level of focus and support because it had always been available to her. And I had participated too, by being so capable, so independent, so determined not to be a burden. I'd convinced everyone, including myself, that I didn't need the kind of attention Vivian received. I'd worn my self-sufficiency like armor, never letting anyone see how desperately I craved the unconditional celebration she took for granted. But now, lying in my expensive sheets in my successful adult life, I finally understood the true cost of that childhood dynamic. It wasn't just that I had been overlooked, it was that I'd learned to overlook myself, to minimize my own needs and feelings in favor of more dramatic personalities who demanded immediate attention. The wedding ban wasn't really about guest lists or venue limitations. It was the culmination of 31 years of a family system that had always made room for Vivian's emotions while expecting me to manage my own. She needed her wedding day to be perfect, free from any reminder of the sister whose very presence had always made her feel inadequate. And everyone expected me to understand, to accommodate, to step aside gracefully for her happiness. What none of us could have predicted was how spectacularly that expectation was about to backfire. 3 days after that devastating phone call with Vivian, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our entire family dynamic. It started with a conversation I'd been avoiding for months. Returning the call of Amanda Sterling, a high-profile entertainment attorney from Los Angeles who had been recruiting me to her firm. Amanda represented A-list celebrities, musicians, and athletes in contract negotiations and legal disputes that regularly made headlines. Her firm, Sterling and Associates, was exactly the kind of powerhouse practice that most lawyers spent their entire career trying to join. She'd been pursuing me since my handling of a copyright infringement case had garnered national attention 6 months earlier. Natalie Rodriguez, her voice was crisp and confident when she answered on the first ring, I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. Just busy with caseload, I replied, though we both knew that wasn't entirely true. The real reason I had been hesitant was fear, not of failure, but of success. Taking a position with Sterling and Associates would mean leaving Arizona, leaving the proximity to family that I'd maintained despite their consistent indifference. I have a proposition that might interest you, Amanda continued. We're opening a new division focused on intellectual property law, and I need someone with your expertise and courtroom presence to head it up. The starting salary is triple what you're making now, plus bonuses, plus a partnership track that could make you a millionaire within 5 years. The offer was staggering, the kind of opportunity that came along once in a career. But it wasn't the money that made my pulse quicken. It was the recognition. The acknowledgement that I had built something valuable, something worth pursuing.
There's one catch, Amanda added. I need an answer by Friday. We're moving fast on this, and if you're not interested, I have other candidates to consider. Friday. The same day Vivian would be finalizing her wedding invitations, addressing envelopes to everyone who mattered enough to witness her marriage. Everyone except me. That evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by case files and legal briefs, trying to focus on work while my mind churned over Amanda's offer. The logical part of me knew this was exactly what I'd been working toward my entire career. The emotional part wondered if accepting would be the final severing of ties with the family I'd spent 3 decades trying to please. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was Vivian Rodriguez Martinez, and the subject line read, Wedding Registry Information. I'd stared at it for several minutes before opening it. The message was a mass email sent to her entire wedding guest list, cheerfully announcing that she and David had registered at several high-end stores and providing links to their wish lists. Crystal stemware, Egyptian cotton linens, professional-grade cookware, items that cost more than I'd spent on furniture for my first apartment. But it wasn't the materialism that stung. It was the casualness of my exclusion. She'd sent this registry information to cousins I barely spoke to, college friends she hadn't seen in years. David's coworkers who'd met her maybe twice. Yet somehow, I hadn't made the cut for even this impersonal, mass-distributed wedding update. The email felt like a slap, a reminder that I existed outside the circle of people worthy of her consideration. I forwarded it to myself and then immediately deleted it from my inbox, not wanting to see her name every time I checked for messages. That night, I called my law school roommate, Jessica Chen, now a federal prosecutor in Seattle. We'd maintained a friendship built on brutal honesty and mutual respect, the kind of relationship where pretense was pointless and advice came without sugarcoating. "Let me get this straight," Jessica said after I'd explained the situation. "Your sister banned you from her wedding because your success makes her uncomfortable, and now you're considering turning down a dream job because you don't want to hurt the feelings of people who clearly don't prioritize yours?" Put that way, it sounded even more pathetic than it felt. "It's not that simple," I protested. "Family is complicated." "Family is only as complicated as you let it be. Look, I've watched you sacrifice for people who don't appreciate it for years. When was the last time any of them asked about your happiness? When was the last time they celebrated your achievements? When was the last time they treated you like you mattered?" The questions hung in the air because we both knew the answers. They didn't ask about my happiness. They assumed I was fine because I always appeared to be. They didn't celebrate my achievements. They expected them because I'd established a pattern of success. They didn't treat me like I mattered. They treated me like I was optional, dispensable, someone who would always be there regardless of how they behaved. "You know what the real problem is?" Jessica continued. "You've trained them to take you for granted. You've made yourself so available, so understanding, so accommodating that they assume your feelings don't need consideration. Why would they prioritize someone who never demands to be prioritized?" Her words cut deep because they were accurate. I had spent 31 years being the low-maintenance daughter, the sister who didn't cause drama, the family member who could be counted on to understand when she was inconvenient. I'd made accommodation my specialty and wondered why no one bothered to accommodate me in return. "Take the job, Natalie," Jessica said firmly. "Stop waiting for people to see your worth. Go somewhere where it's already recognized." After we hung up, I walked through my townhouse, really looking at the life I'd built in Phoenix. The furniture I'd carefully selected, the artwork I'd collected, the books that lined my shelves. All of it chosen to impress visitors who rarely came, to create a backdrop for the life I thought I was supposed to want. But what did I actually want? When had I stopped asking myself that question? I wanted to matter to someone. I wanted my achievements to be celebrated, not just acknowledged. I wanted to be someone's first choice, not their fallback option. I wanted to stop feeling grateful for crumbs of attention from people who should have been investing in our relationship. Most importantly, I wanted to stop shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. Vivian's wedding band had been the latest in a lifetime of requests for me to be smaller, quieter, less threatening to her fragile self-image. But what if I refused? What if instead of accommodating her insecurity, I chose to honor my own worth? The next morning, I drove to work with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My assistant, Marcus Thompson, noticed the change immediately. "You look different today. Determined, like you've made a decision about something big." Marcus had been working with me for 3 years, and his ability to read my moods was sometimes unsettling. He was also one of the few people in Phoenix who'd become genuinely invested in my success, celebrating my victories and supporting me through challenges with the kind of loyalty I'd never experienced from family. "I think I have made a decision," I said, pulling up Amanda Sterling's contact information on my phone. "About the Los Angeles opportunity?" I'd mentioned Amanda's interest to Marcus weeks earlier, swearing him to confidentiality while I considered the implications. Unlike my family, he'd immediately understood the significance of the offer and encouraged me to take it seriously. About a lot of things, actually.
I dialed Amanda's number before I could change my mind. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with anticipation. "Please tell me you're calling with good news," she said. "I'm calling to accept your offer," I replied. "When do you need me to start?" "How does 3 weeks sound? That gives you time to wrap up cases and relocate. Natalie, you're making the right choice. This firm is going to be lucky to have you. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, covering logistics, salary details, and expectations. When I hung up, Marcus was grinning like he'd won the lottery himself. Los Angeles won't know what hit them, he said. When are you going to tell your family? The question I'd been dreading. How do you announce that you're leaving to people who've never asked you to stay? How do you explain a decision motivated partly by their indifference without sounding petty or vindictive? I'll call them tonight, I said, though my stomach clenched at the prospect. That evening, I sat in my living room with my phone in my hands, trying to find the right words. I decided to call Mom first, hoping she might understand the professional opportunity even if she couldn't grasp the emotional implications. Los Angeles, she said after I had explained about Sterling and Associates. But that's so far away, and what about your life here? Your house, your job, your... She paused, and I could hear her struggling to identify what exactly I'd be leaving behind. My job is the reason I'm going, I said gently. This is the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career. But we're your family. Don't we matter more than some job? The question was loaded with assumptions that made me dizzy. We're your family, as if that designation alone should outweigh every other consideration. Don't we matter, as if they'd ever demonstrated that I mattered to them. You'll always be my family, I said carefully. But this is my chance to build something meaningful, something that's entirely mine. What about Vivian's wedding? You can't miss your own sister's wedding. The irony was staggering. For weeks, I'd been told that I wasn't invited to the wedding because space was limited and relationships were complicated. Now suddenly, my absence would be unthinkable. Mom, Vivian made it clear that I'm not welcome at her wedding. She specifically told me not to come. Silence stretched between us, filled with the awkwardness of acknowledged truth. Finally, Mom sighed. She didn't mean it like that. She's just stressed about the planning. I'm sure if you talk to her... I'm not going to beg for an invitation to my sister's wedding, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. If she wants me there, she knows how to reach me. Otherwise, I'll be in Los Angeles building my new life. The conversation ended with promises to stay in touch and plans for family visits that we both knew would be infrequent. After I hung up, I felt simultaneously guilty and liberated, like I'd simultaneously broken a sacred rule and freed myself from an invisible prison. I didn't call Vivian that night. Let her hear about my move through the family grapevine the same way I'd learned about her engagement, her wedding planning, and countless other major developments in her life. Let her experience what it felt like to be the last to know, to hear important news secondhand from relatives who assumed she already knew. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing my own happiness over family harmony. I was prioritizing my future over their comfort. I was refusing to shrink myself to accommodate someone else's insecurity. The decision felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I had no idea that it would also set in motion a chain of events that would transform our family dynamic in ways none of us could have predicted. The 2 weeks between accepting Amanda's offer and my departure for Los Angeles became a masterclass in how quickly family dynamics shift when someone stops playing their assigned role. The moment word spread about my move, I transformed from the reliable daughter who could be counted on to understand to the selfish sister who was abandoning everyone in their time of need. The calls started immediately. Dia Gardman, my mother's eldest sister, phoned to express her disappointment that I was choosing career over family during such an important time. Uncle Roberto questioned whether I'd thought through the financial implications of such a drastic move. Cousin Marisol wondered out loud if I was having some kind of breakdown, making impulsive decisions that I'd surely regret. None of them had called when I'd made partner at my Phoenix firm. None of them had reached out when I'd won that high-profile copyright case.
But suddenly, my career move was everyone's business, worthy of concerned phone calls and unsolicited advice. The most revealing conversation came from my father, who called on a Tuesday evening when I was packing boxes in my home office. "Natalie, your mother is worried sick about this Los Angeles thing," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of paternal authority I remembered from childhood lectures. "Maybe you should reconsider. There are good law firms here in Arizona. You don't need to chase fame and fortune in California." Chase fame and fortune, as if my decade of 80-hour weeks and careful career building had been some kind of frivolous pursuit, rather than the methodical construction of professional expertise. "It's not about fame, Dad. It's about opportunity. Sterling and Associates handles cases I've only dreamed of working on." "But what about family? What about being here for the people who matter?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications. Being here for people who matter, as if my presence had ever been particularly valued, as if my absence would create any meaningful void in their lives.
"I've been here for 31 years, I said quietly. "I've been available for every family crisis, every celebration, every milestone. When has anyone been specifically here for me?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, he sighed. "You know we love you, mija. We just don't want you to make a mistake you'll regret." Love. The word felt hollow, a reflexive response to deflect the uncomfortable truth of what I'd asked. They loved me the way people love furniture. They appreciated my function and would notice if I were gone, but they didn't invest much energy in my care and maintenance. Packing up my Phoenix life became an exercise in discovering how little actually mattered to me. The expensive furniture I'd bought to impress colleagues and dates I rarely brought home. The artwork selected more for its investment value than personal meaning. The closet full of professional attire tailored for courtrooms where I'd felt competent but not particularly passionate about my work. Marcus proved invaluable during this transition, handling the logistics of case transfers and client communications with the efficiency that had made him indispensable. More importantly, he provided a steadying presence during moments when the magnitude of my decision threatened to overwhelm me. "Having second thoughts?" he asked one afternoon, finding me staring at a photograph of last Christmas with my family, all of us arranged around Mom's dining table, smiling up the camera with varying degrees of authenticity. "Third and fourth thoughts," I admitted. "What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I get to Los Angeles and discover I'm not as capable as I think I am?" "Then you'll figure it out," he said matter-of-factly. "You've been figuring things out your entire life. The difference is, this time you're betting on yourself instead of waiting for other people to recognize your worth." His confidence was both reassuring and challenging. Marcus had watched me handle complex legal matters with skill and composure, but he'd also witnessed my tendency to minimize my own achievements and defer to others' needs. His perspective forced me to confront how much of my self-doubt stemmed not from professional inadequacy, but from familial conditioning. The hardest part of leaving wasn't the logistics or even the family guilt. It was facing the possibility that I'd spent 30 decades building my identity around being needed by people who had never actually needed me. What if my role as the responsible daughter, the reliable sister, the accommodating family member had been largely self-imposed? What if I'd been performing helpfulness for an audience that would have been perfectly fine without the show? Amanda Sterling called twice during my final week in Phoenix, checking on my progress and sharing details about cases I'd be working on. Her enthusiasm was infectious, a stark contrast to the concerned disapproval I was getting from family members. She spoke about my expertise with genuine respect, discussed my potential contributions with obvious excitement, and treated my decision to join her firm as a victory rather than a problematic abandonment of duty. "I've been reviewing your case history," she said during our second call. "Your approach to intellectual property disputes is exactly what we need for the Murphy Entertainment account. You're going to revolutionize how we handle these matters." Revolutionize. When was the last time anyone in my family had suggested I might revolutionize anything? When had they ever implied that my skills were unique, valuable, worth celebrating?
3 days before my departure, Vivian finally called. I was in my nearly empty bedroom, folding clothes into suitcases, when her name appeared on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won over pride. "I heard you're leaving," she said without preamble, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. "I'm taking a position with a firm in Los Angeles," I replied carefully. "Mom says you're doing this because of the wedding, because you're mad about not being invited." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to feel unfair. The wedding hadn't caused my decision, but it had certainly crystallized my understanding of where I stood in the family hierarchy. "I'm doing this because it's the best career opportunity I've ever been offered. The timing is coincidental." "Coincidental," she repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Right before my wedding, you decide to move across the country. That's some coincidence." "Vivian, you made it clear that I'm not welcome at your wedding. I'm not sure why my presence or absence in Los Angeles should matter to you now." "That's not—" She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. "I never said you weren't welcome. I just said it was going to be small. You said it was for people who mattered, for people who'd been part of your journey. You were pretty explicit about me not being in that category." Another pause, longer this time. "I was stressed. Wedding planning is overwhelming, and I just wanted everything to be perfect. I didn't mean—" "What didn't you mean?" I pressed. "That I don't matter? That I'm not family? That my presence would somehow ruin your perfect day?" "I meant—" Her voice cracked. "I meant that I wanted one day where I could be the star of my own story." There it was, finally spoken aloud. Not an apology, not an admission of wrongdoing, but an explanation that somehow made me the problem, even as she acknowledged her own insecurity. "I've never competed with you," I said. "I've spent my entire life trying not to overshadow you, trying not to make you feel inadequate, but apparently my very existence is somehow threatening." "It's not threatening, it's just, you're so successful, so together. People always compare us, and I always come up short. I just wanted one day where I could be the star of my own story." The conversation revealed everything and resolved nothing. She wasn't apologizing for excluding me. She was explaining why my exclusion had been necessary for her emotional well-being. She wasn't acknowledging that her actions had been hurtful. She was asking me to understand why they'd been inevitable. "I hope your day is everything you want it to be," I said finally. "I really do. But I won't be there to threaten your spotlight. And I won't be in Arizona to make you feel inadequate by comparison. Problem solved." "Natalie, that's not what I wanted." "It's exactly what you wanted," I interrupted. "And you got it. I'm leaving. You can have your wedding, your family's attention, your moment of being the successful daughter without any uncomfortable comparisons. Isn't that what you asked for?" I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and grief. The call had confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. There was no version of our relationship where both of us could thrive. In her mind, my success required her diminishment. My presence demanded her eclipse. She'd chosen to solve this zero-sum equation by eliminating me from the equation entirely. The remaining days in Phoenix passed in a blur of final preparations and stilted conversations with family members who seemed to think I was making a terrible mistake, but couldn't articulate exactly what I should do instead. Stay in Arizona working for a smaller firm, turn down a dream opportunity to maintain the status quo, continue shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable. Isn't that what you asked for? On my last night in the house I'd called home for 5 years, I sat in my empty living room with a glass of wine and my laptop, researching Los Angeles neighborhoods and Sterling and Associates' most famous cases. The silence felt different from the usual quiet of my organized, solitary life. It felt like potential rather than loneliness, like anticipation rather than resignation. I'd spent 31 years being the daughter who could be counted on, to understand, to accommodate, to step aside when necessary. Tomorrow, I would start being the woman who bet on herself, who pursued opportunities without asking permission, who refused to apologize for taking up space in the world. The journey to Los Angeles would take 6 hours by car, but I knew I was traveling much further than that. I was leaving behind the person I'd been,
dutiful, deferential, grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way, and stepping into the person I was ready to become. What I couldn't have imagined was how dramatically that transformation would soon impact the very people I was leaving behind. Los Angeles hit me like a wall of possibility the moment I stepped off the plane at LAX. The sprawling city stretched endlessly in every direction, a maze of highways and glass towers that seemed to pulse with ambition and opportunity. Everything felt bigger, faster, more intense than the orderly predictability of Phoenix. Even the air tasted different, electric with the dreams and desperation of millions of people chasing their versions of success. Sterling & Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise in Century City, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Hollywood Hills and downtown skyline. The lobby alone was more impressive than most law firms' entire offices, with marble floors, contemporary sculptures, and a reception desk that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Amanda Sterling met me personally on my first day, something I later learned was unprecedented for new hires at her level of seniority. She was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations. Sharp, elegant, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases other lawyers wouldn't dare take on. "Welcome to the big leagues," she said, leading me through hallways lined with framed magazine covers featuring the firm's celebrity clients. "Your office is on the 32nd floor, corner position with a view. I want you comfortable because you're going to be spending a lot of time here." My office was 3 times the size of my Phoenix workspace, furnished with sleek modern pieces and equipped with technology I'd only read about in legal journals. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city sprawling below, a constant reminder that I was operating at a completely different level now. The first month was a whirlwind of learning curves and late nights. Sterling & Associates didn't ease new attorneys into their caseload. They threw you into the deep end and expected you to swim with Olympic-level skill. My first assignment involved untangling a complex royalty dispute between a Grammy-winning producer and a record label worth 9 figures. The legal issues were intricate enough, but navigating the personalities involved required a completely different skill set.
Tommy was initially skeptical about working with a relatively unknown attorney on such a high-stakes matter. Our first meeting took place in his Malibu recording studio, a sprawling compound where platinum records lined the walls and Grammy Awards were displayed like casual decorations. "No offense, but you look like you just graduated law school," he said, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd built an empire by reading people accurately. "Amanda tells me you're some kind of genius, but this case could make or break my legacy. I need someone who understands what's at stake here." "I understand that you've been systematically cheated out of money that belongs to you," I replied calmly. "I understand that the people who did this are counting on you being intimidated by their resources and their reputation. And I understand that if we do this right, we don't just win your case, we expose a pattern of fraud that's probably affecting dozens of other artists." Something in my tone must have convinced him because his expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued. "You really think we can prove they've been doing this to other people?" "I think we can prove they've built their entire business model around creative accounting that benefits them at their artists' expense. Your case isn't just about recovering your money, it's about changing how the entire industry operates." That conversation marked the beginning of the most challenging and rewarding work of my legal career. Over the following months, I constructed a case that was equal parts financial detective story and corporate exposé. We uncovered evidence of systematic manipulation dating back 15 years, involving not just Tommy, but dozens of other artists who'd been similarly exploited. The breakthrough came when I discovered a series of internal emails between label executives discussing strategies to minimize artist payouts while maintaining plausible deniability. The language was careful, couched in business terminology, but the intent was unmistakable. They'd been deliberately structuring contracts to obscure true royalty calculations, knowing that most artists lacked the resources to audit their books effectively. "This is it," Amanda said when I presented the evidence during a strategy meeting. "This isn't just contract fraud, this is racketeering. We're not just suing for damages, we're potentially looking at criminal referrals."
The case began attracting media attention when we filed our expanded lawsuit naming multiple plaintiffs and alleging industry-wide conspiracy. Music industry publications picked up the story first, followed by mainstream business press, then entertainment outlets fascinated by the David versus Goliath narrative of artists fighting back against corporate exploitation. My name started appearing in articles quoted as the attorney spearheading a revolution in entertainment law. Interview requests poured in from legal journals, trade publications, and entertainment blogs for someone who'd spent her career in relative anonymity handling corporate disputes in Phoenix. The sudden visibility was both exhilarating and overwhelming. The first major profile piece appeared in Los Angeles Magazine, featuring a full-page photo of me in my office overlooking the city. The headline read, "The Phoenix Rising, How Natalie Rodriguez is Revolutionizing Entertainment Law." The article detailed my background, the complexity of the Velasquez case, and the broader implications for artist rights in the digital age. "Rodriguez brings a unique perspective to entertainment law," the journalist wrote. "Her background in corporate litigation gives her the technical skills to navigate complex financial structures, while her outsider status allows her to see patterns that industry insiders might miss. She's not just winning cases, she's exposing systemic problems that have gone unchallenged for decades." Reading my name in print, seeing my work described in terms of industry transformation rather than simple legal victory, felt surreal. For the first time in my life, my professional achievements were being celebrated not just as individual accomplishments, but as contributions to something larger than myself. The recognition accelerated when Tommy's case went to trial. The courtroom was packed with industry representatives, journalists, and other artists whose cases were pending against similar allegations. My opening statement was live-streamed by multiple outlets, reaching audiences far beyond the typical legal community. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I began, standing before the packed courtroom with complete confidence. "This case is about more than money. It's about a system that has been designed to exploit the very people whose creativity generates billions in revenue. It's about corporations that have built their profits on the assumption that artists won't fight back, won't have the resources to challenge their accounting, won't have the legal expertise to expose their manipulation." The trial lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from forensic accountants, industry experts, and artists who'd experienced similar treatment. The defense tried to frame it as a simple contract dispute, but the evidence of systematic deception was overwhelming. When the jury returned a verdict awarding Tommy $47 million in damages, plus punitive awards, the courtroom erupted in applause. Outside, reporters surrounded me as I delivered a statement that was broadcast nationwide. "This verdict sends a clear message," I said, facing a forest of cameras and microphones. "The era of unchallenged exploitation in the entertainment industry is over. Artists have rights, they have value, and they have legal advocates willing to fight for them." The victory triggered an avalanche of new cases, media appearances, and speaking engagements. Entertainment Tonight featured a segment on the lawyer taking down music industry giants. Billboard published a cover story on the new sheriff in music law. Legal publications analyzed my trial strategy and predicted broader implications for entertainment contracts. Within 6 months of arriving in Los Angeles, I'd gone from unknown attorney to recognized expert in entertainment law. My calendar filled with speaking engagements at law schools, industry conferences, and professional associations. Other high-profile clients sought my representation, bringing cases involving film studios, streaming services, and celebrity endorsement deals.
Amanda promoted me to senior associate ahead of schedule, with a salary increase that doubled my Phoenix income, and a partnership track that would make me a millionaire before my 35th birthday. More importantly, she gave me autonomy to build my own practice within the firm, specializing in artist rights and entertainment industry reform. "You've accomplished more in 6 months than most attorneys achieve in 5 years, she told me during my performance review. "You haven't just won cases, you've created a new specialty area that's generating millions in revenue for this firm. More importantly, you've established yourself as a thought leader in entertainment law reform." The success felt different from anything I'd experienced in Phoenix. It wasn't just professional achievement, it was recognition that my work mattered, that my skills were rare and valuable, that my perspective was changing an entire industry. For someone who'd grown up feeling invisible despite her accomplishments, the sudden visibility was intoxicating. But success in Los Angeles came with pressures I hadn't anticipated. The constant scrutiny, the expectation that every case would be a landmark victory, the responsibility of representing not just individual clients, but broader principles of justice in the entertainment world. I worked longer hours than ever before, driven partly by passion and partly by the fear that this recognition might disappear as quickly as it had arrived. Late at night, in my new Beverly Hills apartment, surrounded by case files and industry publications featuring my name, I sometimes wondered what my family thought about the transformation. The articles had been picked up by Arizona media outlets, my success covered by local newspapers and television stations. Surely they'd seen the coverage, read about the woman who'd left their quiet disapproval for national recognition. But I was too busy building my new life to dwell on their opinions. For the first time in my career, I was exactly where I belonged, doing work that mattered, surrounded by people who valued my contributions. The loneliness I'd felt in Phoenix had been replaced by purpose, the constant sense of being underestimated replaced by genuine respect from colleagues and clients. I had no idea that back in Arizona, my newfound fame was creating ripple effects that would soon reach far beyond the entertainment industry and ultimately transform the very family relationships I'd left behind. The call came exactly 11 months after I'd left Phoenix, while I was reviewing contracts in my corner office overlooking Century City. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day where I barely had time to grab lunch between client meetings and court appearances. My assistant, Kevin Martinez, buzzed through on the intercom with unusual excitement in his voice. "Natalie, you're going to want to take this call. It's from Vivian Rodriguez in Arizona, and she sounds different." Different was an understatement. When I picked up the phone, Vivian's voice was strained, almost desperate. Nothing like the confident dismissal I remembered from our last conversation. "Natalie, I need your help," she said without any greeting or small talk. "Something terrible has happened, and I don't know what to do." My first instinct was concern. Had someone been hurt? Was there a family emergency? But as she continued, the nature of her crisis became clear. It wasn't medical or personal, it was professional, and it was devastating. "David's company is being sued," she explained, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of panic. "The sporting goods chain he manages, apparently they've been selling counterfeit merchandise for years. And now there are federal charges, fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. David says he didn't know, but his name is all over the contracts. We could lose everything, the house, our savings, his job. They're saying he could go to prison." The irony hit me like a physical blow. For months, my family had treated my legal expertise as something vaguely impressive, but ultimately irrelevant to their daily lives. Now, suddenly, that same expertise was their only hope of salvation. "How bad is it?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be worse than she wanted to admit. "Bad," she whispered. "Really bad. The FBI raided the warehouse last week. They took computers, files, everything. David's been suspended pending investigation, and his lawyer says the evidence looks overwhelming. Natalie, I'm scared. I don't know anything about this kind of law, and the attorneys here keep giving us different advice. We need someone who understands federal cases, who knows how to fight this kind of thing." The vulnerability in her voice was unlike anything I had heard from her before. This was the sister who'd spent our childhood commanding attention effortlessly, who'd glided through life assuming everything would work out because it always had. Now she was facing a situation where charm and tears wouldn't solve the problem. Only legal expertise could help her. "What does David say about the charges?" I asked, already shifting into attorney mode despite the personal complications. "He swears he didn't know the merchandise was counterfeit. He says his suppliers provided all the necessary documentation, and he trusted them because they'd been working together for years.
But apparently, some of the paperwork was forged, and the FBI is saying he should have known. I'd seen similar cases during my time in Phoenix. Middle-level managers caught in conspiracies they claimed not to understand, facing federal charges that could destroy their lives. The complexity of proving intent versus negligence in these cases was exactly the kind of challenge that required experienced federal defense counsel.
Please, she interrupted, and I could hear tears in her voice. I know things have been complicated between us. But you're family, and you're the only lawyer we know who's actually successful at this level. Everyone here keeps talking about hiring some expensive attorney from Phoenix or Denver, but we can't afford anyone good enough to handle federal charges. We've already spent our savings on the lawyer David has now, and he's basically told us to prepare for the worst. The desperation was palpable, but so was the calculation. She wasn't calling because she'd suddenly realized my worth as a sister. She was calling because she needed my professional skills and couldn't afford to pay market rates for them elsewhere. What about the wedding? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop myself. I thought I wasn't family enough to be included in your important moments. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong about the wedding. I was jealous and scared, and I made a terrible mistake. But, Natalie, if David goes to prison, there won't be any more important moments. There won't be anything left. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. No real apology for excluding me, no acknowledgement of the deeper family dynamics that had led to that moment. Just an admission that she'd made a mistake, followed immediately by a plea for me to save her from the consequences of her husband's legal troubles. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, I repeated. This kind of case requires someone with specific federal experience, someone who understands the nuances of intent and conspiracy law. I could recommend some excellent lawyers who... We can't afford excellent lawyers, she snapped, her desperation briefly flaring into anger. Do you know what federal defense attorneys cost? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. David has already been suspended, so we have no income. Our savings are gone. The house is probably going to be seized as an asset. We're broke, Natalie. Completely broke. The financial desperation was real, but it also revealed something telling about how she viewed our relationship. In her mind, family meant being available to provide professional services at below-market rates during emergencies, while also being expected to understand when you weren't welcome at celebrations. I'm not a criminal defense attorney, I repeated. This kind of case requires someone with specific federal experience, someone who understands the nuances of intent and conspiracy law. I could recommend some excellent lawyers who... We can't afford excellent lawyers, she snapped, her desperation briefly flaring into anger. Do you know what federal defense attorneys cost? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. David has already been suspended, so we have no income. Our savings are gone. The house is probably going to be seized as an asset. We're broke, Natalie. Completely broke. The financial desperation was real, but it also revealed something telling about how she viewed our relationship. In her mind, family meant being available to provide professional services at below-market rates during emergencies, while also being expected to understand when you weren't welcome at celebrations. Even if I took the case, which would be outside my expertise, I couldn't do it for free. I have responsibilities to my firm, my other clients. This would be a massive commitment requiring months of work. I know. We'll pay you, somehow. Maybe we can work out a payment plan, or you could take a percentage of any settlement, or... She was grasping, throwing out ideas that revealed how little she understood about legal fee structures or the reality of defending federal charges. But her panic was genuine, and despite everything that had happened between us, I found myself feeling sympathy for her situation. Let me make some calls, I said finally. I know several excellent federal defense attorneys who might be willing to work with you on payment arrangements. I can't take this case myself, but I can help you find someone who can. Thank you, she said, relief flooding her voice. Thank you so much.
I knew I could count on you. Family always comes through for family, right?
The phrase made me wince. Family always comes through, except when they don't. Except when they exclude you from weddings because your success makes them uncomfortable. Except when they spend decades treating your achievements as less important than someone else's social milestones. Over the following weeks, I made good on my promise to help find David competent legal representation. I reached out to colleagues, researched federal defense specialists in Arizona, and eventually connected them with Patricia Williams, a former federal prosecutor who had built a successful white-collar defense practice in Denver. Patricia was exactly what David needed: experienced, skilled, and willing to work with their limited budget in exchange for a larger contingency percentage if they avoided prison time. She reviewed the case and concluded that while the charges were serious, David's role appeared to be more negligent than intentional, which significantly improved his chances of avoiding incarceration. Throughout this process, I received regular updates from Vivian, who'd suddenly become very interested in maintaining our relationship now that she needed professional favors. Her calls were always framed around family connection, how much she missed me, how proud she was of my success, how she regretted the misunderstanding about the wedding. But the calls always came when she needed something: information about David's case, recommendations for other legal issues, advice about financial planning during legal proceedings. Never just to check on my well-being or share news about her life that didn't revolve around her crisis. The most revealing conversation came 6 weeks after her initial call. David's case was progressing favorably, with Patricia negotiating toward a plea agreement that would involve fines and probation rather than prison time. Vivian was effusive in her gratitude, crediting me with saving their marriage and their future. "I don't know what we would have done without you. You saved us, Natalie. You're the best sister anyone could ask for."
Should have. Past tense regret that cost her nothing to express now that she needed my cooperation. But no mention of changing the dynamic going forward, no recognition that the wedding had been a symptom of deeper family dysfunction, no indication that she'd learned anything beyond the fact that my professional connections were more valuable than she'd previously understood. "I'm glad things are working out for you and David," I said diplomatically. "Maybe when this is all over, we could plan a visit. I'd love to see your life in Los Angeles, meet your colleagues, maybe take you to dinner somewhere fancy to properly thank you." The offer felt hollow, contingent on her gratitude rather than genuine interest in my life. She wanted to visit Los Angeles to see the success she'd once found threatening, to be associated with the sister whose achievements now served her purposes. But I'd learned something important during my months in California. Surrounded by colleagues who valued my work and clients who respected my expertise, I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need her friendship or her gratitude or her belated recognition of my worth. I had built a life where my value wasn't contingent on family approval or dependent on their crises. 3 months later, David's case was resolved with a plea agreement that included financial penalties and community service, but no jail time. Vivian called to share the good news and once again express her gratitude for my help in connecting them with Patricia. "We're going to throw a celebration dinner," she said. "Nothing fancy, just family and close friends. David's parents are flying in from Seattle, and Mom is making her special tamales. It would mean so much if you could be there." A celebration dinner. The parallel to her wedding was unmistakable. Another important family moment, another gathering of people who mattered. But this time, I was being included. This time, my presence was desired rather than tolerated. "I'm sorry, but I can't make it," I said, without offering an elaborate excuse or apologetic explanation. "I have prior commitments here in Los Angeles." "Oh, well, maybe we could reschedule, pick a weekend that works better for you." "I don't think so," I replied calmly, "but I'm glad everything worked out for David." The silence stretched between us, filled with her confusion and my quiet certainty. She expected me to jump at the chance to be included, to be grateful for this belated invitation to rejoin the family circle. Are you still upset about the wedding?" she asked finally. "I'm not upset," I said, and realized it was true. "I'm just busy building my life here. I hope you understand." The conversation ended with polite pleasantries,
but we both knew something fundamental had shifted. She'd assumed that helping with David's legal troubles would restore our previous dynamic, that gratitude would rebuild the relationship she'd damaged with her wedding exclusion. But I'd learned something important during my months in California, surrounded by colleagues who valued my work and clients who respected my expertise. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need her friendship or her gratitude or her belated recognition of my worth. I had built a life where my value wasn't contingent on family approval or dependent on their crises. 6 months later, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Not for Vivian, she and David had eloped during their legal troubles, but for my cousin Marisol. The envelope was addressed in careful calligraphy, the invitation printed on expensive cardstock, the reception listed at an upscale resort in Sedona. At the bottom, someone had handwritten a note, "It wouldn't be the same without you. Hope you can make it." The handwriting looked like my mother's. I held the invitation for several minutes, thinking about the young woman I'd been when I left Phoenix, desperate for inclusion, willing to accommodate any request, grateful for whatever scraps of family attention came my way. Then I thought about the woman I'd become in Los Angeles, confident, successful, surrounded by people who valued my contributions without requiring me to diminish myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Sterling. "Drinks tonight to celebrate the Morrison settlement? The whole team will be there." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. See you at 7. This was my family now. Colleagues who celebrated my victories, friends who valued my perspective, a professional community that had embraced me not despite my ambition, but because of it. I'd spent 31 years trying to prove I was worthy of my family's love. In Los Angeles, I'd finally learned something more valuable. I was worthy whether they recognized it or not. And that recognition, once gained, was something no one could ever take away from me again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.